it's easy to get into this mindset of like just focusing on sounding, playing a bunch of stuff that sounds really neat for 30 seconds. But that's and that will maybe get likes on Instagram or something. But in terms of telling a story, expressing bigger ideas, you want to be able to think in some larger structures. Hey, Rangers. So I hope you all are doing great. For this week, we're going to be dealing with through composed form. And since this is Thanksgiving week, we'll be doing a little bit less than usual. Of course, we still always want to strive to write music every day. But in terms of the expectation, usually I expect you to write 4 or 5 lead sheets a week, realistically. For this week, I think it would be great if you're able to write 2 or 3. And then in terms of how many you turn in, usually you guys turn in 2 each week. For this week, because of the Thanksgiving holiday, you'll just be turning in 1. So whichever one you want, and I'll give feedback on that next week. Anyway, yeah, what we're dealing with is we're going to call through composed form. So what does through composed mean? It has kind of 2 different meanings. And one means just that everything is written out from beginning to end. And that's not the meaning that I am talking about when I'm saying through composed here. Because if that's all that it means, then any song, any AABA song can be through composed if it's written out from beginning to end. The other thing that it can mean is it might have a structure that doesn't really have lots of repeats in it. It might have some sections that repeat, but it doesn't flow in like an AABA or ABAC type of way, but instead it sort of is constantly evolving. And it's funny, so in that case, then you can have improvisation as part of your through composed form. Just what makes it through composed is that the improvisation is not necessarily happening over a structure that appeared prior to the improvisation. It could be happening over its own thing. When we think about through composed form, we are often thinking about like longer structures, but that's not necessarily the case. Through composed just means that it is something that that evolves in a way that hopefully flows. But it doesn't have to. It means that you don't have traditional repeated sections. So the first example I want to listen to is one that you're probably familiar with, but I want to think about it from a structural standpoint, and it's the song "Blue and Green." Now, in terms of the overall piece, the overall structure of this song is very traditional. It's jazz in the jazz world. It's a head, solos, and head. So in that respect, it's not a through composed structure, but it is a through composed form in that what is being improvised over is, and what we think of as the head as the main melody, doesn't fall into some category of AABA or anything traditional like that. So I just want to listen to it with that in mind. And I'm just double checking, but it is a 10 bar form. So yeah, just to get us in the mood, something we're already familiar with. Think about blue and green and how it flows without traditional repeats in terms of the form. But again, it in terms of the structure is head solos head. All right. So that's an example of through composed song form. But in terms of the structure, it is head solos head, and something that I think really makes that song just feel so so flowing is that it's that 10 bar form. We're so used to 4 bar phrases, that it almost is hard to tell. Like you have to really be paying attention to sort of hear when one chorus stops and the next chorus begins throughout the improvisation, and it just it's really a neat effect. Anyway, so as you're exploring through composed writing this week, that's one thing you might consider, would be just thinking about writing a short form that would be played in a traditional structure of head solos head, but keeping the form more through composed. And sometimes the other reason that I think that song works, Blue and Green, is because of its brevity in terms of the main melody. When you have melodic lines that aren't really, where there's no real repetition, having lots of them is going to make it feel less definitive. It's going to be hard for the listener to latch onto anything. But because there are so few phrases in that 10 bars, every single note feels really important and intentional. And so that gives us enough to hang on to as listeners. So it's not to say that we can't have songs that are long, but when we do have through composed things that are long, we have to figure out ways to give the listener something to grab onto in terms of the expectation. Because if all you have is surprise, then nothing's a surprise. So you need to have that expectation. So because Blue and Green is such a short form, everything that gives it a certain sense of expectation, since all of the lines are surprise. Because it's short enough, we feel like we can grab onto it. We don't feel overwhelmed or lost, because that's what would happen if it was just random line after random line. We would just start to tune it out after a while, most likely. I mean, you never know, everybody hears music differently, but that's a likely case. So I guess I wrote down some questions of things to talk about. One question is, why use through composed form? And I think the primary reason to to go for through composed form is it allows for a, a, a s- a dramatic narrative arc. Um, you know, we often in more traditional song forms we have kind of usually a more traditional sort of arc to our songs. In terms of the song form, it's usually kind of a build up. If it's an AABA, usually the climax is going to happen in the second half of the bridge. If it's an ABAC, the climax will usually happen on the C section. And with through composed forms, we're able to have numerous climaxes and have lots of contrast and bring ideas back. We can think about beyond just also the form. We can start thinking in terms of the structure. And so we might have sections where, like a bridge, where there's a contrasting section, or we might have even an interlude, which is like a new idea for a little bit, and we might bring a section back, but have it develop further or in a new way, and with all that each of those things is surprise. So we have to balance it with some expectation. So that might mean having motifs that get brought back throughout a piece, even if the actual section doesn't repeat. Maybe there's some rhythmic idea or some melodic fragment or something that comes back around that the listener can grab onto. Also, we also want everything to feel definitive. So space between phrases can be a way of helping something feel more definitive, in the same way that putting a period at the end of a sentence or indenting a paragraph can help us as readers grab onto, oh, there's a new idea here. This is a topic sentence. This is an important thing I'm about to read. In that same way, putting some space at the end of a phrase or at the end of a section can really help whatever you're saying carry a little more weight. So I'm gonna play for us now, and we'll listen to it all the way through. A great example of through composition by the great composer and saxophonist Wayne Shorter. This is from an album called Atlantis. And this one is actually through composed, in that there's no improvisation on this song. And that's a great album, by the way, Atlantis. Great writing. Anyway, this song is called The Three Marias, and he's recorded it since then too on his recent album Emanon. He did a really cool version with chamber orchestra and his quartet, but this original version is really great. So as we're listening to this, think about some of those things that we talked about motivic development, about kind of telling a story in terms of the narrative arc of the piece. Think about how he uses space and phrase lengths to punctuate his ideas and give them weight. Yeah, check it out. We'll listen to this one all the way through. Yeah, man. Anyway, that's a piece to get inspired by. I've been listening to that song for over 20 years, and I still, every time I hear it, I find new stuff. And the next question is how do we approach writing through composed music? One way is through some of the stream of consciousness type of exercises that we've talked about. One way is just singing into a tape recorder. Uh, that's a similar way to get at some of these through composed ways, just allowing yourself to improvise melodies. And it takes time to get used to, and you can always edit afterwards, but it's a way to just get some flow happening. Or you can do a written out stream of consciousness exercise. So let me give you some examples of kind of that style of writing. The first is John Coltrane, his composition Alabama, and we won't listen to the whole thing. It is a song that happens. He plays the whole melody, and then they improvise over C minor, and then they do the whole melody again. So it is again head solo head, but the melody, the way John Coltrane wrote it, this was written after the bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, in which 4 young black girls were murdered. Uh, and he wrote it inspired by the speech that Dr. Martin Luther King gave after that. And I think they said he said, or it's been said that he was thinking about that speech and the cadence of Dr. King as he was creating the melody for this song. And this is a through composed melody. So we'll listen to it, and I'll stop it during the solo. So all of these ideas, compositional techniques, fragmenting an idea, expanding on an idea, and repeating ideas. And that's what kind of holds it all together in the same way as with the Three Marias. We kept having ba ba da ba da ba da da da, right? We have that motif happening, and there's the rhythmic motif of ba da ba 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 do da, right? There are a few things in there like that. There's kind of some spots that almost feel like an AABA for a minute, and then it just goes someplace different. So when we have something that's through composed, having a lot of motivic development can really help, again, create that sense of expectation, give the listener something to grab onto, that helps everything feel definitive and gives us that expectation to balance the surprise of not knowing the form in advance. Even with like Alabama, where it has an almost meditative quality to it, but it makes it stand out so much. They're just sitting on this open fifths in C minor for most of it, and then all of a sudden you hear da do da 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 da, and these chords that are stepping away from that, and it makes everything feel very definitive because we've got that place for it to pause, and we hear those chord changes. They feel really important, and they give the listener something very clear to latch onto. So with all things through composed, we have to work extra hard to balance the expectation and surprise. Let's see. Another one, I'll just give an example. Something I wrote. This was for an introduction to a song. Uh, Jeff Baker was doing a version of the song "Ballad of the Sad Young Men," and wanted a string introduction, and Daryl Grant was doing the arrangement of the tune, but they asked me to write a string intro. So this one is an example of, rather than actually singing into a tape recorder, this was a stream of consciousness exercise. Basically, I kind of played around with the song for a minute and kind of got in the zone, and then just started writing idea after idea. Just in a lead sheet form, and then I went back and harmonized it and maybe added a little counterpoint, cut, edited it, and then arranged it for string quartet, actually string quintet. So we won't listen to the whole thing, but this is the Avalon String Quartet playing this introduction, and then it goes into the arrangement, and we'll listen to the beginning of that. It's cool. Brian Blade is on drums, and it's a really great arrangement that Daryl did, and it's a nice recording. So anyway, this is an example of using stream of consciousness writing to come up with something through composed. Okay. So again, that there are little motifs that keep coming back around throughout that. So even though there's no exact repetition, there's enough ideas that it gives it a sense of unity, and the listener something to grab onto amid all that surprise. Okay. Another way to approach through composition is thinking in terms of traditional song form. So that's kind of a fun aspect. Once we start to get really solid with all these song forms, partly why we start with AABA and ABAC and these traditional song forms is because we start to get a sense of how ideas want to flow from one to the next, and how these different sections function, what a bridge does, how the kind of feeling it's meant to get in a section, why the climax happens on the letter C of an ABAC, things like that. You start to really internalize them. And once you have that internalized, then you can play around with it. So I can think of a lot of tunes I've written that are actually kind of variations on a traditional song form. So some might be an AABA, but each A section is different enough from the other A sections that it almost feels through composed. But in my mind, I'm thinking of it as AABA, and it has that sense of direction that comes with it. So a tune of mine that where that is the case is there's a tune of mine called "What I Can Never Say." Or another one, I have a tune called "Symmetrics." That's an AA. It's like an AABA form, except there's no last A. It goes to a C, and the C cuts off the B section 2 bars early. So it's like an AABA form that gets interrupted. And that's how I was thinking about it, that expectation and surprise. I set up a real clear, this is going to be an AABA, and then instead I interrupt it with a different section. So these are some ways we can think about it. And then the other way is think in terms of how we deal with these structures. If we're thinking of long form, a lot of times, like with big band charts, I might write ahead, the initial melody form is just an AABA. But that initial in-head is the only time you hear the AABA. and the whole rest of the song is like new sections. So solos over totally different, different types of ideas, and then when we come back, it's variations on things we've already brought up throughout the course of the arrangement. So a tune of mine that comes to mind like that is a big band chart I wrote called Obergefell, where the main melody is AABA, but once you've heard that main melody, the whole rest of the song is, there's like a brass chorale. It goes to a different like partito, alto, vamp. There's a through composed improvised duet, through composed in terms of what chords they're playing on, and then just variations and climactic development for the outhead. So you never really get AABA except for the inhead. So that's another way you can think about using these forms is you can go with the traditional song form, which is nice. It sets a really nice expectation. It brings the audience in. But then you can like say, okay, and now I'm going somewhere new. And that's also thinking about through composition in a different way. But I'm going to play you a tune of mine now that is, I would consider this through composed, but it's more variations on traditional song form. So it's like thinking of AABA, but I think there's like kind of an extra A that sort of goes up a little before you get to this B section, and then solos are over kind of their own harmonic thing. There is a solo over that, and then there's an interlude, and before it all started there was an intro, and then it kind of does go to the bridge after the interlude. Then it goes to a climactic sort of ending. Anyway, it feels through composed throughout, but I know at the time I was writing it, I was thinking about the AABA, but saying, ooh, wouldn't it be neat if I added this here? What if I threw this into that form? So it's taking these forms that we've internalized and allowing yourself to kind of color outside the lines. So that's how I was thinking about this. And so that's just another way to approach it. You can think about... So one way was the stream of consciousness way. This way is more like thinking of a form and then varying it. And this all, again, is for the purpose of developing some unpredictable, a less predictable dramatic narrative arc in terms of the story you want to tell. So that's the function of it. Not all, I went through a phase where I was like, everything has to be through composed. And certainly there's so much great through composed music too. And a lot of it is, I think of it as being in the big band realm, so I'm saving some of that for spring term, but we'll be listening to, if you're looking for some stuff, some like Ellington's A Tone Parallel to Harlem, or like Bob Brookmeyer, his Celebration New Works album, that's sweet, or Maria Schneider's music. There's lots of beautiful through composition throughout all of that. So I encourage you to listen to that and listen to it from a standpoint of structure. And structure, by the way, I'll probably talk about this again in its own video, I hope, at some point, although we're coming close to the end of the term. But structure is where it's at. Like, that's so much of what all this stuff is about. We often, I know when I was younger, I often was all about like, ooh, this is the neat voicing. But that's not really, that doesn't make or break a song, having a cool voicing, right? The the structure, how you tell the story is really huge, and that's where we want our heads to be. And so whether, when we start thinking about it that way, that also opens us up creatively to other influences beyond just like music that sounds cool. All of a sudden we can look at plays, we can look at films, we can look at speeches, we can look at books, we can look at short stories, we can look at like food. All of these things, how are we getting from one place to another within whatever vocabulary it is that we're choosing to use? So, not everyone's vocabulary has to be appealing to everybody else. In fact, it won't be. We all have our own taste, but we all can be playing with those same elements of expectation and surprise, and thinking in terms of the big picture, because we're not just making music to like, show off on TikTok or Instagram or whatever. If we did, then I mean, I hear, everybody kind of, it's easy to get into this mindset of like just focusing on sounding, playing a bunch of stuff that sounds really neat for 30 seconds. But that's, and that will maybe get likes on Instagram or something. But in terms of telling a story, expressing bigger ideas, you want to be able to think in some larger structures. So through composition is a way that kind of allows you to play with some of that. Anyway, here's one of my tunes. This is a composition called KUNLANGETA, and it makes use of some of that stuff. So I hope you all enjoy it. All right, so it's a lot of expectation and surprise to be played with. I'm gonna include scores to the things that we listen to in this video, and please have fun. Let me know what questions you have, and I'm excited to hear your work. So again, for this week, just one lead sheet that you need to turn in. But it would be good for you to, of course, we always aim to write a song every day, and I would love for you to write like 2 or 3 this week. It would be great. But you only have to turn in one. All right, guys, have a good week and have a wonderful Thanksgiving.